right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our conversation today, digitizing experiences, utilizing Web3 and blockchain data to drive consumer loyalty. My name is Andrew Lee. I'm an assistant professor here at Tepper. I'm also one of the founders of ENAiBLE, a retail and services collaborative, jointly run right now within CMU's School of Computer Science, Tepper School of Business, and College of Fine Arts. Just for anybody that's kind of new to our events, ENAiBLE is a unique forum aimed at the retail and service industries for meeting the needs of their customers through advances in both design and technology. Our explicit mission is to create more humane, efficient, and positive retail and service experiences by creating a community of conversation across industries and CMU departments. There's much more information about this on our site at cmu.edu/enable, ENAiBLE. And finally, a big thanks to our current sponsor, the Home Depot. Just a few logistics before we get started. Number one, as usual, this event is being recorded and is on the record. The video will be posted onto our website. Number two, as usual, we strongly encourage you to ask questions throughout the event. But in this case, those of you that are familiar with ENAiBLE events may be noticing this is actually open in an even deeper sense. This event today is meant to be a cameras on open audience discussion. And so what that means is if and when you have a question at any point today, you can ask that question either by just hitting the raise hand button on Zoom, or you can throw that question onto our chat, which is seen by everybody here, right? This is, again, different than our usual kind of a Q&A structure where you pose questions that get filtered through some sort of whatever, right? Today, we're looking for discussion at kind of all times, okay? Let me briefly introduce today's speakers. Our moderator today is Ari Lightman, Distinguished Service Professor of Digital Media and Marketing at CMU's Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy. Joining Professor Lightman, we have panelists Sam Perl, who's at the Software Engineering Institute's Center for Cybersecurity, and Scott Likens, Innovation Hub Leader at PwC. Actually, Ari will be leading kind of today's discussion. And also from here, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Ari. Go ahead.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it. We're very excited to talk about the subject, which Sam, Scott, and myself are very passionate about and very interested in. To kick things off, I thought we'd talk a little bit about what Web3 means to us and what interests us about this sort of evolution towards Web3. I'll kick it off. When I teach Web3 in my classes, whether it's my marketing class or my digital transformation class, I look at the transition from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, right? This idea of Web 1 being centralization of information and value, Web 2, centralization of value, decentralization of information, and then Web 3 is open, decentralization of everything. But as Scott and I have talked about before, it's a bit of a misnomer because we're seeing centralization and this is just happening. And I'm interested in sort of the brands in terms of their response, how they might utilize Web 3, whether it's Nike or Estee Lauder or Tiffany's or whomever, how they might utilize this. So I'm going to kick it off with Sam. Sam, if you could tell us a little bit about your interpretation of Web 3 and what interests you in the space.
Sure, Ari. Thank you, and thank you all for having me. Real quick amendment to my organization. I'm with the CERT division of the Software Engineering Institute. So, and that particular division came out of kind of a large-scale event, cybersecurity event on the very early internet, right? So we talk about kind of Web 1.0. This is around the time of Web 1.0 or predating Web 1.0 with the Morris worm. And sort of the idea was we have all of these nodes are connected to the internet, and the worm keeps propagating itself and taking them offline. they would then take the computer offline, wipe it, put it back online, and the worm would, get back onto the computer. And so somebody needed to coordinate centrally, right, information that all of the nodes needed in order to defend themselves against attacks. So that's the origin of my program at CMU. CMU was directed by the government to run, that coordination back in 1988 and 1989 timeframe. So from that, the CERT division has grown, and now we handle other types of cybersecurity related research, lots of R&D in that space. SEI is also looking at, AI technology and other things that we're going to be getting into. But generally, we are, kind of focused on software and software engineering. So my interest specifically kind of, in Web3 is mostly from a cybersecurity perspective, but also kind of as a kind of, long kind of user and developer on the internet, right? So I was developing applications for Web 1, and I think of Web 1 and Web 2 a little differently than Ari. I think of it as Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, which kind of goes back to, kind of the original Tim Berners-Lee kind of applications for creating web servers, web clients, right, for exchanging information with servers. And you still had a decentralized network, right? So Web 1.0 was a decentralized network, very decentralized, no central server, right? Similar to sort of email in that respect. So to me, like Web 1.0 was decentralized, right? And in fact, you see this amazing kind of spread of growth, ideas, and exchange of information with that decentralization. Web 2.0, to me, right, goes back to the sort of feature-rich applications on servers. So beginning much more dynamic user content, right? Websites go from being kind of order takers to dynamic kind of applications. Think Gmail, right? That's Web 2.0. And so what this does is create a consolidating effect on kind of the vast majority of the internet. And there's a really funny cartoon that I show in one of my classes when I'm teaching on blockchain technology, because I teach a class of blockchain technology. So I kind of come at it from a technology focus and perspective. We don't even get into Web3 until we go through kind of blockchain technology and internet technology and client server architectures and peer-to-peer architectures. So, we kind of, go on. So, but anyway, so for Web 2.0, I still think that, right, they have not yet evolved, right, entirely to Web 3.0, which in that sense, and not to get confusing here, is the semantic web, right? The linking of kind of entities on the internet, right, with other entities on the internet in the form of a sort of knowledge graph, if you will. So if you look at like Google Knowledge Graph, and this powers their images, right, site primarily, as well as some other kind of features related to sort of grabbing information from Wikipedia and other sources and saying, so if you type in Leonardo da Vinci, you get sort of, a page about, that summarizes Leonardo da Vinci's connections right on the internet. So you can get to his works, you can get to his biography, you can get to his date of birth, death, right, his relatives, other things like that, right? That's sort of this idea of a semantic graph and knowledge that can be explored. Web 3. So that's Web sort of 3.0, also known as the semantic web. Web 3, in my opinion, right, it's just completely different than all of that. It is the idea that, right, you would have these sort of servers, but that they are not owned, right? The content on them is not sort of owned or operated by any central authority. And this is uniquely kind of possible by some kind of shared understanding, okay? And so, this is why I don't get into Web3 right immediately in my class. We have to figure out how do we have a shared understanding, and generally the answer to that, kind of in a modern context, is have some kind of blockchain, right? And there's lots of different flavors of these. So that's kind of my approach to the idea of Web3. But I think once we get there, then we can begin having a real rich conversation about kind of like pros and cons, trade-offs versus Web 1.0, Web 2.0, kind of, what do people want? What are people like, look for in their digital experiences, I think that really matters a lot, right? The cartoon I was referencing earlier is there's a group of people that are depicted, and it says, kind of Web 1.0, Web 2.0, everyone can run their own server, and everyone's like, yay, right? And then there's this big, huge building that says Facebook on it, right? And it says like, oh, well, actually, everyone can just host the content that they want other people to see on our server, right? Essentially for free. We'll run all of the server stuff for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And everyone migrates to Facebook, right, immediately. And so this was sort of like, Ray, we all want to say that we love to run our own server, but actually our behavior is that we will flock to a centralized authority who makes it easier for us to have the experience that we want. So I'll end there because I got a lot more to go. But anyway, that's kind of how I approach the beginning of the discussion.
Thanks, Sam. So we see Web3 from a marketing perspective. We see Web3 from an infrastructure security perspective. Scott, would love to hear your thoughts associated with how you explain Web3 and what you're interested in associated with the space.
Yeah, I'm just formulating how I even respond. I didn't know Sam until today, but I just say, yep, I agree. We can move on. I'm kidding. So I have to kind of balance, I think, what the way Ari described it and what Sam just went into. My background, I also lived Web 1.0. I worked on the first browser, Mosaic. Well, we would say it was the first browser from NCSA, sold it to Microsoft in the 90s. So, to that Web 1.0 mindset, I was actually a pilot, and I was doing the programming to pay for flight school because I thought flying was cool. And then I said, hey, I think internet's cool, in the early 90s. And I think the way Sam described it was distributed, it was open, it was dark and crazy, and it was fun. And we harnessed all of that in the 90s to say there's value here, but we're not sure what it is, but we're going to figure it out. And I still remember early conversations explaining what email was and why we should have it, to a software company who said, that's crazy, we never would need that. You think about how that rolled into Web 2.0, and I have a similar definition, I think, the way Sam and I think Ari described it. It then got centralized because we commercialized it, right? And that's what happens. It becomes, hey, I'll do it for you for quote unquote free, which we all know is not the case. But what the momentum then, and we also had a crash, right? We had all this funding, and then it all went away, and the good stuff came out of the ashes. And then I also definitely agree, and I love the nuance of Web 3.0, which is very clearly defined, I think, almost 30 years ago. And I'll actually be devil's advocate saying we're actually seeing that right now happen in front of our eyes, I think, with generative AI and large language models to some degree, along with multimodal. But the Web3 that happened in between, I think, is actually my passion. And we're on the record, so I won't go into why, but I truly believe value should be owned at an individual level, and there shouldn't be layers in between, whether it's governmental or enterprise or commercial or corporate. Like I see the power of that for the world, having lived in Asia for many years, seeing the differences of the banking networks, of the financial security of everything about their world. Living in the U.S., we don't see that as often. So I see the power of that connectivity globally, the financial inclusion, the protections, all these things that could happen. But my worry is, and Ari, you mentioned it, we were scaling up this Web3 world, which was truly decentralized ownership and identity. It was all at the personal level, which is so important as a human. And then again, we started to commercialize it. And we look at the last 2 years of fraud and horrible, defaults, all of which were not the technology, all of which were human nature. And I go back to that fundamental, like if you read the Satoshi's Manifesto, or you go all the way back to the early days of the internet, it was about connectivity, distribution, ownership, and it was about making a better world. So I'm excited about Web3, and I'm also excited about 3.0 even more. But I'm excited about Web3 because I think we can truly fundamentally change inherent technical architectures that have been around for decades. From mainframes to client server to the web, it's still fundamentally, my opinion, the same architecture, data at a center, whether it's a database or a file, and then sharing it out. I think Web3 changes that. I think blockchain was a fundamental change in the idea, and that fundamental agreement being in mathematics and things that are much beyond my understanding in cryptography and taking it out of the hands of humans was really important. because we could use technology to negotiate trust. And I published articles years ago around automating trust, and blockchain helps do that. So for me, the passion on Web3 is getting back to that, fundamental focus and mission of enabling humans in a better way with technology. And I think in the middle, capitalism and commercialization and money, sometimes gets in our way. And I think that's what happened over the past few years of Web3. But I think we have a bright future. I believe in it, and that's why I'm excited.
Awesome, thanks. So if we take this notion, we'll bring it back to the function of ENAiBLE, we take it back to brands and how brands might utilize Web3, leveraging the blockchain to create value-added experiences for consumers. So the idea of a tokenization of a good or service that they might be able to offer. One of the notions that's really interesting in the space is the connection to NFT and the connection to crypto. Now, I've talked to Sam about NFTs before, and I've talked to Scott about crypto. So with NFTs, you have a baggage associated with it because of all this malicious attempts, phish attempts, all these sorts of things. I bought a lot of NFTs. I don't realize any value, and I know a lot of people the same, but the idea is sort of this connection associated with a community, this idea of play to earn gaming, but there's still, in this space, because it's relatively nascent, there's still a lot of safeguards that haven't been put into place around consumer protection. So that's the NFT space. With the crypto market, I mean, listen, the sky's the limit. We could talk about Silicon Valley Bank, we can talk about FTX, we can talk about all the shenanigans that are going on that are creating multiple levels of volatility. So to what extent does Web3 from a brand perspective need to dissociate itself from the NFT market and the crypto market in terms of creating the safeguards for consumers to have an understanding and an element of security to actually participate in sort of the Web3 industry? I'm going to open it up to Scott.
Yeah, I'll start. I think there's no doubt that there's been a little bit of a pullback in the use of the term Web3. And now, an example I'll give you is for the last year, we were planning an event called the Emerging Tech Exchange, and the title was Innovations Powering Web3. So we weren't focused on Web3, we were focused on the innovations powering it. As we talked to speakers in October, November, December, every one of them said, "Whoa, do we have to say Web3?" And I think to your point, we've now associated what I believe is really sound technology with failures and corruption and bad things happening that were, in my opinion, only mostly human-based, right? These schemes that were created and they were taking advantage. The technology I still think is sound. So as we went through that, we dialed it back a little bit, but we had the event 2 weeks ago. And I think every executive in there, and I focus on enterprises, large enterprises, they saw the power of Web3 with the fundamental building blocks being sound and disconnecting the hype of failures. And I won't mention names because we're on record. Very public failures is separating what actually happened in those failures versus what's happening in the technology. So what we're focused on is let's get into the details of where to invest from a blockchain perspective. What does a non-fungible token really mean? And I'll tell you, there's a resurgence of activity around NFTs, not maybe what we saw last year and maybe what you bought, some artwork or some fancy thing that was crazily raising in value. What we're seeing is tokenization of intellectual property in a different way. I work for an accounting firm. Can we tokenize financial reporting so that we understand that it's secure and protected and portable and use that in a new way versus some of the older ways and legacy technologies? Can we tokenize physical assets, whether it's a brand creating something in virtual and then creating a physical connection to it or vice versa? There's actually a resurgence of those discussions because, again, the technology is sound. We have to somewhat figure out the wallet structures. They're still very technical, they're very complex. The normal user, it's not normal. But I think, and again, without mentioning names, there's been some recent examples of big tech companies announcing things around wallets and infrastructure. And so if we can, again, humanize or simplify, just like back in the day, I bet Sam and Ari and others, when I got into the internet, it was green screen. I was typing everything by hand. And when the browser came about, it opened up to a lot of people. Like, I'm comfortable in a wallet as is. Most people aren't. Let's solve some of those human interaction problems the technology is still sound. So, for me, it's about focusing on those building blocks, continuing to demystify what this means. There's still a lot to solve. So, we don't know the answers to a lot of where the future is going to go. But I don't want to separate it. I want to fix it. And I think if we get the right minds together, I want to fix it and get rid of a great speaker at our event. She said, last year washed out all the BS around crypto. So now let's go do it the right way, right? Let's get it regulated. Let's put the standards and governance in place, and let's use this new technology the way it should be used. And that's my view. And of course, I work with enterprises, so I want to help them do that. But I truly believe that. I truly believe the power of the technology is still sound.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Sam?
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad you went to Scott first, because now I can just say, yeah, all that. But, so I think, I very much kind of just reacting like just a kind of really interesting experience, that Scott has had with this. I kind of had a similar experience working for an agency that made websites for brands back, in the 90s. And it was similar to the kind of, so we worked with Mosaic, right? Because we had to test and make sure that sites worked on Mosaic. This is going to make sense, right? So back then, I mean, if you think of a browser as kind of an analogy to something like a wallet, your method of interacting with the back end, right? You could pick whatever method you wanted. You could write your own. And people did. I mean, we used to write little, browsers or scripts to test websites all the time that were not fully featured, that only needed to sort of, test one particular piece. And we used to have sites running on, 14, at one point, 21 different browsers. Now you see, right, experiments with apps where they're running apps on the actual hardware and OS, for hundreds of different phones, right, and mobile phones, just to make sure that their, site is working on those phones. And that's something that big companies can do, right? Smaller developers have a harder time replicating that kind of experience for users. So, so I really sympathize and kind of, connect with that kind of ethos that Scott's talking about. And I have some friends, right, from that time period when Web3, and this was back when it started to become in the news every day, and NFTs were trading and people were buying them, though that community got really excited. And it was because they had been through what Scott was talking about, right? We had been through Web 1.0, super exciting. Let's build the new road. We actually can, lay the track ourselves, and, we can take it wherever we want. And there were a lot of creative stuff out there. I mean, it was half the company was programmers. The other half was creatives. They didn't know how to program. They made beautiful imagery. They made experiences, right? They made kind of experimenting with color and shape and community. It wasn't about kind of code this into a page. It was, how do we want these users to experience our brand and our site? So yeah, a lot of that kind of got pushed into these sort of mainstream. This is wireframe kind of standards. It made coding a lot easier and faster, but right, there were less kind of unique experiences to have. Okay. And when these things like NFTs and before, as was mentioned, the kind of contagion and risk kind of crept in, or the abuse, if you will, there were a lot of experiments going on. I mean, what I find real interesting, because we teach this in the class as well, about NFTs, was a lot of speculation, right? There was just a lot of speculation, partly because, right, it was, well, if this takes off the way that kind of the Web 1.0 and 2.0 movement took off, right, there could be some big value to sort of for an investor, obviously. But interestingly, kind of on the point of the technology, like you can make it yourself. You don't have to kind of go to someone and say, hey, make me an NFT. Now, very quickly you saw big companies say, hey, we'll come to our site and we'll make an NFT for you. But if you analyze the actual technology, right, it wasn't what was happening. They were kind of centralizing the process, and to avoid sort of fees and things like that, they were not using the kind of technology that was decentralized. They were using centralized technology. So, a lot of it does come down to that technology issue. And that's why we kind of, in our class, we try to educate students and work on, let's look under the hood, right? And look at this technology. So when it comes to the kind of brands and experiences piece of the question, what I see is kind of, this technology exists, has been shown, right, to be a shared record. And we get to decide, like, in other words, these companies get to decide on how or if they want to use it. And I think you're seeing a lot of experimentation on that front. Now, some of those experiments, again, due to speculation, just sort of went crazy and then crashed again, similar to the fact that there was a crash in Web 1.0. And then, yeah, out of those ashes, as Scott said, right, like new business models emerged. So what I'm really excited to see is, right, if you think about something like Amazon, okay, they fixed something like, right, they fixed the delivery model that was really hurting a lot of brands in Web 1.0 with logistics and supply chain, right? Because of that, then their digital experience, right, could really give customers what they wanted in a way. So full-on returns of anything that you got, right? In the early days, you buy shoes and it would be difficult to return them, or it would take a long time to receive them. Now, you can do it digitally. You can get it in a day or two, and you can return it if it doesn't fit for no cost. That replicates enough of the retail experience that people were familiar with that now you can experiment with new retail experiences. So what I'm excited for is, what does it mean for having a technology, right, that brands can experiment with to create new experiences, and how will they do it? But I don't think they can just entirely rely on digital alone. I think they got to also do other new things along with it. So anyway.
That's a great segue, Sam. So I have a question for Scott, and then I'm going to have a question for you, Sam. Scott, Christina sort of wrote in, which is a great segue, this idea of value, right? How do brands determine value? They want to utilize this mechanism associated with imprinting data on the blockchain, right? Associated with value for consumers. That value could be identity, that value could be service records, that value could be experience, those sorts of things. We saw, as you mentioned before, we saw a lot of experimentation in NFTs where it went from, silly images of monkeys and PFPs, profile pics, to play to earn games. So now we're seeing some really interesting things associated with value utility around IP ownership, especially within the music industry, right? So Scott, if you're working with a client and they're trying to understand Web3 and trying to determine value, what are some things that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so simple questions to answer. Just need about 30 seconds here on that one. I don't have that all in my head yet, right? I think it's a little bit of a complicated. We're still in the early days. I want to take NFT out of it because to me, this Web3 is about a cryptographically secured shared ledger, and there's many ways to do that. And on that, I can have a fungible or non-fungible. There's lots of things. We see smart contracts. I go to a simple story, and I think this is relevant for retail and consumer. And this is before we actually had the idea of an NFT. The actual standard didn't exist. We were working to secure baby formula in China coming from New Zealand, and there was a bad example in China where there was a counterfeit product and it actually killed babies. So think, what more important mission to start with? We worked with the government, we worked with tech companies. We said, could we follow milk from the farmer to milk powder across this supply chain into mom and dad and make it simple and authentic? And what we thought what we found was blockchain was the way that we could do that without changing tremendously complex and archaic legacy systems, including governments. We could mark something that people would trust, and we could follow that very simply using WeChat in China in a QR code. So very basically follow that product into mom and dad's hands. But the unique part of that was mom and dad were willing to pay a lot more for that product. And I won't go into the numbers because it's confidential, but it was a lot more because of the authenticity. And believe it or not, this was in 2015. The word blockchain made them feel more comfortable. Right or wrong, they said, if I could look at a blockchain and see who touched this, I feel better. So as an example of following some sort of physical or digital product, so whether it's IP or milk powder, being able to track that in a shared way with very little to no integration into legacy systems. So a new public cloud-based technology being the blockchain, be able to market and follow it. But then on the upside, that consumer reaction, more trust, more money, it just checked all these boxes. Now, that was years ago. And now you think about the ability we have to do that more effectively today in any retail market. If you're creating a secondary market you can guarantee authenticity in a different way. It takes other technologies. And I've always said, I think blockchain is one piece of the puzzle. I think some sort of marking and Internet of Things or connectivity to physical and to digital is needed. I think AI is needed to understand all of the gray market or patterns or optimization. So you start to put these emerging techs together. I think NFT is just, we've associated it with this artwork. And honestly, it's probably the worst use case ever. And no offense, Ari, you probably lost money on those. It's one thing. But I look at supply chain as, if I can create a non-fungible token associated to a physical product and somehow lock that identity, I can mark it, do all sorts of things. The amount of data and visibility and transparency I now have as it flows through a system today that is completely opaque to an enterprise. I can give you countless examples of consumer products that the retail seller of that product has no idea what happens from manufacture to the time it arrives. And if I could squeeze days or weeks or months out of that chain, if I can provide protections that it didn't get dropped, all of that requires this technology, whether you call it an NFT or not, the ability to market in a central and accessible and visible way for all of the players in an ecosystem. That to me is the power. And I can go through many, many examples across any industry. Are they up and running today? No, there's some very big failures of shipping companies that said, oh, we're going to shut it down, it's too hard. All of that, in my opinion, becomes governance and process hard, not technology hard, right? The ability to create this stuff, to Sam's point, anyone could create it. My team is minting on many of the public chains, minting on our private chains. Very easy. Now we start to solve the portability across those chains. Okay, that's the next step. And again, you go back to the days of e-commerce. I have heard rumor that when people went online to sell, it didn't take off until the credit cards guaranteed if you didn't get the product or was wrong, they would back it. So it had nothing to do with e-commerce or tech. It was about that safety net for consumers. So that other question, I think I saw one in there about, how do we make this safer for smart contracts? Well, we haven't necessarily figured that out, to be honest. And we have to. That's why I said, let's fix this and accept it's better versus just say it's wrong. Sorry, ranting.
Well, no worries. On that path with my NFT collection, Scott, it's mostly CMU students and alumni who create NFT collections, and I acquire them. So for me, it's
one of them will hit.
There's value there, absolutely. Okay, Sam, you're up. So we have to get into security. So we're at CMU. You're at the Software Engineering Institute, and you do a lot with Scilab in terms of security and privacy. Mark mentioned, smart contracts are still, they're still just centralized code, right? It's a mechanism of code there. We know that code is not infallible. There are a variety of different mechanisms because, once again, it might be structured. Blockchain might be sort of this immutable distributed ledger, but people utilize it and people are inherently insecure, right? So the question then becomes, how do we work on safeguards to make sure that this becomes a more, even looking at solidity programming, when you write the contracts, how do we make sure that there's a mechanism around an understanding and assessment, whether it's DevSecOps at the beginning or those sorts of things, to create security mechanisms and protocols around the development of Web3, right? to create some of the assurances needed for brands and, let's face it, early majority to come into the space?
Yeah, that's a great segue, Ari. So that's kind of something that I spend a lot of time on. The sort of secure coding aspect of what does it mean for all of this stuff, and part of that is in the program that I mentioned, the CERT division of the Software Engineering Institute, we have a group that focuses on secure coding. This is general secure coding, right? We focus on software engineering. Part of software engineering is secure coding. We have published books, the secure coding guide to Java, right? Like the Software Engineering Institute published that book, right? Like we wrote it. And Solidity is an offshoot of Java with some modifications to make it a little bit more kind of Web3 friendly. And that's the whole point, is like we are building right off of an existing sort of infrastructure, right, to make it so that these new products can interact with the things that we already have. The legacy systems was a great point. Like you can't develop something and say, oh, it's not going to work with legacy systems, because people can't adopt it like at all. So everything that you do has to be done within a technology, a policy environment, all this stuff. I actually have some kind of on that topic. Like we've done some research and work on, you can't ignore policy. Like some of the early kind of blockchain evangelists was like, oh, well, this is outside of the, kind of authority of governments. And that's just not true. I mean, you could say that a smart contract interacts in an automated fashion. But there's sort of some great work by our law professor Lawrence Lessig, who was very instrumental in the early kind of internet revolution, who was talking about smart contracts, and he basically said, in any contract, the state is also there with both parties, because if they decide that it's not an enforceable contract, right, then that's going to get rolled back, or there's going to be some kind of legal interpretation, and you're going to have to live with the results, whether or not it happened in code or in physical space or whatever, right? So, and that's true, right? The law always is there. So this idea that the law is not there is sort of, it's a myth. But anyway, but getting back to the point about security, I don't know that we have the answer on that. And CMU has a variety of research programs that we're doing on kind of looking at the security of code. One of them is from Scilab. So Scilab has a number of different research projects going on right now to look at secure coding, to come up with new languages. So I could actually get into a little bit more detail there. There's a researcher who's working on a language called Obsidian, which Jonathan Aldrich from Scilab, to try to kind of make it a more improved, right, and more secure language, to reduce the amount of kind of bugs or vulnerabilities that can be introduced into the code. That's the first part, right? Is to actually have a language that's a little bit more safe. So the second thing is, what does it mean to use the language to create programs, right? So we're like, in my class, we do labs, and we teach students to code using labs for smart contracts specifically, right? And this is a lab that they can kind of get their arms around. And, it's not going to be a secure smart contract, I'll put it that way. But we also don't deploy them on kind of publicly available networks, right? So the idea here is, right, you have to understand kind of where your code is going to go. And with the model of Web3, it's going to go everywhere. And everyone is going to have kind of control. So it has to be even more kind of battle hardened, if you will. The other problem, right, is with coordination. So we deal with coordinating and vulnerabilities on the internet every day, right? So there are kind of vulnerabilities that get discovered in regular code, right? You can go and look up CVEs and other kinds of metrics for determining how how these vulnerabilities, how many of these vulnerabilities there are, who's finding them, reporting them, etc. We're a part of that ecosystem, okay? And we get information to vendors to say, hey, fix this code, send out a patch so that, people can't be exploited by that. We're part of that ecosystem, and it doesn't always work. Most of the time it does, right? But not always. And you get things like, Neo4j that essentially get out before we can get ahead of them, right? So it's a problem, and it's not easy to patch something in the current version of the Web3. But I really do encourage, working with students, testing kind of different languages. Like, students are a great way to see, hey, if I design a language, can they code in it securely? What mistakes are they making? Like, you can look at, and get data on that problem. And so CMU is doing really kind of foundational research on that topic right now. We don't have a full solution, yet. And I don't know that we ever will as a sort of society, but like, CMU is sort of working towards trying to solve that problem. It's a great question.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it. Listen, I want to shift a little bit and talk about loyalty. So I'm a marketing professor. I see Alan's on the call as well, and those sorts of things. We think a lot about how do brands retain consumers by providing unique experiences, but also information that is valuable for them. I mentioned to my students, if you want to find me on a weekend, I'll either be at Lowe's or Home Depot, probably both, doing stuff. And the reason why I go to these big stores is because they have a record of all this information about the different shades of paint that I used, when I bought it, what the finish is, and it's there. But that's not my data. I don't own that. I can't transfer that, right? So we have big, massive loyalty programs. We're working in my class right now with Marriott. They have a huge loyalty program called Bonvoy, and you get a variety of different benefits out of being a part of that Bonvoy program. How does Web3 and blockchain come in to maybe disrupt how loyalty programs are currently doled out, currently experienced, and create greater levels of stickiness in terms of customer retention around utilizing those loyalty programs? Scott, I'm gonna open it up to you and get your thoughts.
Well, I want to be controversial because I think there's two sides to the loyalty programs. We all talk about that differentiated experience, and as a person that has pretty high status on a lot of different loyalty programs, there's another side of it that actually is just the financial commercial side. We always ignore the fact that these are really profitable when we use it to, we use credit card company partnerships or ancillary company partnerships, and we sell these points. That there's actually a pretty strong financial model that drives most of that. So on the marketing side, we always talk about experience, but if that experience doesn't go back to that bottom line, how much do we actually do? As a very premium member, is my experience that different? Marginally, right? It's about collecting points and the direct tie into dollars, which is where I want to focus. The loyalty programs are probably one of the first kind of crypto type technologies, but they were just managed, in a brand's central technology bank, right? We created banks of fungible tokens effectively, but we manage them in a proprietary system. So why wouldn't we look at a non-proprietary way to manage those? Well, I go back to being controversial. If my points are portable, I really have to have loyalty. And why do I have loyalty today? Because I'm locked in. I can't move my points out of that brand. So I'm all in. So part of my controversial view is truly creating loyalty has to be more than just earning those points. We have to really stand out. If I could take all my X airline points and move them to Y airline points and get the same status, that's dangerous for X airline because I really have to do something different. So from a technology perspective, I think from a cost savings perspective, this is a no-brainer. And I wonder why no one's done it yet. Yeah. And I worry that because that portability is going to be solved eventually. Now, if I'm in a loyalty program that's a network program, again, this is a no-brainer. having portability of these across my different systems and not having to change the enterprise systems, it's a no-brainer. I can do it much more effectively and cost effectively and transparently to my actual loyalty member. So I believe there's a lot of opportunity here if done right, but I think we have to rethink loyalty programs because, again, this is putting the power truly in the consumer person's hands. And I wonder if we really want to fully do that. I believe we should, but I think there is some risk inherent in that. But I think technology-wise, it's a no-brainer.
Will consumers have the power to drive this forward, or will it still be maintained associated with large corporation interests?
I mean, I think that's truly the question. If we want to really create loyalty and we believe we have a differentiated brand, then we don't worry about this. So we make it portable. I won't give the name, but I was based in Hong Kong, and there was a loyalty program that did this, but it wasn't using crypto. It was pre-crypto, right? It was a multi-brand loyalty program. But there's been very few examples of that. There's partnerships, but again, that's typically done on a financial transaction level versus kind of that truly differentiated experience level. So I think opportunity for sure. We have to rethink loyalty programs and how we want to create that stickiness with the consumer.
Sam, thoughts on that?
Well, this is another great topic. I loved Scott's answer, and I even remember back, kind of back in the day when loyalty programs kind of got started, then got popular, and then accounting firms started asking, how are you accounting for these points that you are giving?
That's right.
People? That's a liability on your balance sheet. Where are the numbers, right? And then all of a sudden the loyalty program sort of saying, no, this is actually costing us a lot of money when people don't pay that, don't use their points for anything. We still have to hold this on our balance sheet, and investors don't like it. So then they started changing the policy on the loyalty program. So I think there's this evolution that's inherent in terms of technology, policy, finance. It all, kind of moves together. You can't just move something independently. So that's the backdrop for, I think, the loyalty discussion. The second backdrop is, I think, again, to Scott's point on NFTs were used for sort of a digital art. And I think there's really good reasons for that. Initially, right? Artists in particular, historically, are a place where experimentation happens. Radical experimentation. There's artists back in the 1950s, right, that were creating essentially the idea, right, that were experimenting with the idea of value that was not kind of, in an object, right? You give the artist something, they convert it to a block of gold, and they throw the gold in the river, right? And they say, this piece of paper is now the piece of gold because the gold is essentially sort of untouchable now, right? You can't go get it. And it was sort of a demonstration, right, of performance. So I think, there's some logical connections between those two communities in terms of experimentation. However, I think the speculation sort of muddied the waters of the kind of NFT discussion, right? Because now when you think NFT, you think something I buy that's going to go and be worth a lot of money in the future. I don't actually think that's going to likely be the sort of future of NFTs. I think you're really going to see things that are essentially first of all, these cost literally close to nothing to create, right? Where else in our economy do you see things that cost nothing to create being sold for millions of dollars? You don't, right? You have to actually, have a cost of creation, and some of that's creative, and some of that's whatever, right? The only place you find it really is in the art market, okay? And after that, it's that's a totally different discussion, right? But I think you'll see, and brands can experiment with things that cost them nothing, right, to create, but can add value in terms of small conveniences, tracking, right, or giving customers their data, or giving them smaller pieces or parts of their data, like to Ari's point. These can cost, these cost nothing to make, or very low amounts of energy to make. And I'm thinking, you don't even need to use a public blockchain for that, right? We have blockchain interoperability. It has weaknesses, as we talked about, right, with smart contracts and things like that. But you can do this on a sort of private blockchain and say, all right, come look at our private blockchain and, look at everything here. If you trust our brand, right, then you can sort of trust our system and you can access it in a way that maybe you can't access our private database, right? So I do think that there are customers who are interested in that. I think you can make experiences, right? Experiences is a big thing.
Yes.
Right? A digitization kind of either truth of authenticity of an experience. That's just not something we have a good handle on right now. And being able to track things like that that's just experiences. That's not anything else. The thing that I think, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize, but Andrew's sort of giving us the high sign. It's going to interject about 2 minutes. So
great.
Before we get cut off the air, I have to ask this question. From a CMU perspective, within Web3, what do you think collectively CMU can focus on from a research perspective, given all of our capabilities around social behavioral economics, to cryptographic analysis, to security, privacy, to understanding experience and digitization? Where would you like to see research at CMU on this space? Do you want to kick that off, Sam?
Yeah, sure. That's true. So what's amazing is like me kind of as an instructor, I get to go out and talk to the different professors at CMU who are doing the research. So I already see that there's a ton of amazing stuff going on. I mean, there's a researcher at the School of Computer Science, Seth Goldstein. He's just creating kind of peer-to-peer blockchain systems that will allow community members to kind of, give loans to other community members without banks. That's, in my opinion, an amazing project, right? And he has tons of historical kind of anecdotes as in terms of bank failures for this technology working, right? Without the blockchain piece, but like other aspects of peer-to-peer lending working without banks. That's kind of an amazing thing. So anyway, I just think CMU has a full court press on these issues. We have, a very computationally heavy psychology department. Our human and computer interaction research is just super strong. I think smart wallets is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of features and functionalities that those things could actually have. I think of those as like browsers from 1.0 versus browsers today, right? Yeah. Imagine all of the things that your browser can do today. Smart wallets, in my opinion, can't do anything yet, right? But they will be able to someday. So I take a long view. I think smart wallets, I think, kind of distributed consensus. So Elaine Shih and her team at Scilab, just an amazing research kind of agenda on distributed consensus. And they're just going further and further and further. So yeah, I think, the future is bright when it comes to the research at CMU on that topic. Yeah.
Scott, you got the last word. What do you think? What would you like to say?
I think I'm excited about zero knowledge proof. I'm excited about trustless systems. I'll just leave you with, we're all comfortable with the current systems, but there's no denying they're not better than these new technologies. Like the last few weeks, I mean, hopefully you're looking at the financial system going, wait a minute, I thought this was safe, right? It's as safe as we believe it to be and what regulation is creating around it. There is so much more happening in these technologies to automate trust in a good way, to take people out of those parts of the equation that are fraught with fraud. We've got investors. I saw some of the questions. Is it too early? Absolutely not, right? It's too early for one solution to solve everything, but absolutely not to get into the building blocks of innovation. If you're not studying everything happening in blockchain and zero knowledge, you're not studying what's happening in AI and generative AI, you're not studying how IoT and AI and blockchain are working together, you're going to get caught off guard. And that's exactly what happened to all of these e-commerce companies. And it all got centralized by people that were already studying it. So it's not too late. The privacy is important. We have to protect the privacy at all costs. And these technologies do that inherently by default. It's built in, right? Mathematically, it's beyond someone writing code to do it, right? That's why I'm excited. So I would start, be curious, experiment, but waiting is probably not a good option.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, both Sam and Scott. This has been a great discussion. We could go on for hours, but Andrew giving me the credit sign. So back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, guys, I mean, to the audience, I mean, I hate this part of the job, which is ending awesome conversations while they're very much kind of going on. I just want to respect the hard stop that we have. I know we could go on for hours. Let me just say kind of two things in closing. Number one, just the audience, in case you're looking at kind of future events, there's one here on the left that I think might be, of interest to this audience. You can check it out here, and we'll share the registration link to that event in our usual follow-up event, our follow-up email after this event. And on the right-hand side, as always, if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing at ENAiBLE and how to engage, or specifically how to engage maybe with today's panelists, right? Anything of that flavor, please reach out to us at our email here, ENAiBLE, ENAiBLE at cmu.edu. We are at all times looking for engagement at all levels, right? But again, the follow-up email will certainly send out information on how you can connect to today's panelists. Let me stop there and just say thanks everyone for coming, and thank you again to our speakers, Ari, Sam, Scott. This is an awesome discussion, and thank you for everyone that helped put on this event, Laura Alford, Chris Kissel, and our current sponsor, ENAiBLE, the Home Depot. That'll close the event. Thanks to all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.